Hey everyone, Alex Gotcha Fans coming to get you guys another video. Today is just going to be a video on my different complaints about Godzilla Kingdom Monsters, but also some things I like. So sorry if I go really fast, but I do have a lot of notes. So the movie starts off with a Godzilla 2014 flashback and features the death of Andrew with Dr. Mark and Emma Russell both trying to find their son. First of all, this character, Andrew Russell, is supposed to serve as the catalyst for each character's motivation that's a part of the Russell family, yet we're not given enough time with him to actually establish who he is as a character, his personality, really anything besides the fact that he died and he was just related to these other characters. Second, the scene goes to Yunnan Rainforest, which is in China, Monarch Post 61, and we get to see Mothra for the first time. Now, honestly, Mothra's emergence out of her little cocoon looks like a ripoff of the Mutos, and out of nowhere, Dr. Emma Russell pulls out the Orca device, which can somehow call out the creature's signal. Now, my biggest problem with the Orca device is that it's basically a MacGuffin for this whole entire movie that each character has to try and get their hands on. Either the villains have this MacGuffin device, or the heroes have this MacGuffin. But this MacGuffin is also overly powered, because you can play any sort of frequency and it works for any other monsters. Something I don't get is that it's later revealed that King Ghidorah, aka Monster Zero, is in fact a creature from outer space. So how come a terrestrial-based frequency work on the creature, despite the fact that it has a completely different physiology and doesn't even obey the laws of nature? So then we go into the Monarch scene again, and we have Alan Jonah breaks in with this terrorist organization. First of all, I didn't even know Alan Jonah was going to be a villain. It honestly just comes out of nowhere. There's no establishment for who Alan Jonah is as a character. We're not even given a proper motivation for why he's even evil or why he even wants to form this terrorist group. He just breaks in and starts shooting people, but he doesn't hold any personal resentment towards these people. He's just randomly killing people. So then we cut to the next scene where Dr. Serizawa and his group of lackeys of Monarch are part of this court case, and this court case literally feels like an entire ripoff of Ian Malcolm's scene from Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. So do you remember in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom when Ian Malcolm is talking about how the dinosaurs have been here for many years and how we're meant to coexist with them and all that kind of stuff? Well, Dr. Serizawa does basically the same thing. He even says that, no, Godzilla, we have to find a way to coexist with Titan, with Godzilla. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is literally just like Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. How can you justify these monsters' existence when they kill thousands, if not millions of people, and yet you don't think that the most rational thing to do with them is at least destroy some of them that could be seen as malevolent, instead of just saying all of them are benevolent as a sense. So then we cut to the scene in Colorado where Dr. Russell is in fact photographing wolves, and this is where a lot more of the comedy starts in. So the comedy, the first instance of comedy for this movie that I could tell, starts where they show the Muto tape at the court scene and then they leave. So then they go to Colorado and they talk to Dr. Mark Russell and they're saying, oh, we need you and stuff like that. And the color grading pretty much becomes like Kong Skull Island, where there's a lot of greens and oranges out of nowhere. I'm like, oh my goodness, am I watching a completely different movie? What happened to the color grading in the scene? So then we get some more awkward jokes with Sam talking about Mark Russell's wife, Emma Russell. I'm just like, oh my goodness, what's the point of this jokes? So then they go to the Monarch base, and this is where they go to Castle Bravo, which is Monarch's base, named after the atomic bomb incident with Godzilla 1954. And basically, when they showed this scene, I was literally thinking, oh my gosh, am I watching a S.H.I.E.L.D. episode, or am I watching the Avengers, where they go into Helicarrier? Basically, Monarch is no longer keeping things a secret. They're basically S.H.I.E.L.D. now, recruiting all these monsters, just like the Avengers. And Dr. Serizawa, also similar to Ian Malcolm, is basically the new, he's basically the new Avengers leader. So I'm like, oh my goodness, what the heck is going on? So then we have Godzilla emerge at the base. And this is honestly one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie. There's so much tension in this scene, but all the tension that happens in the scene, even the jump scare, gets ruined by one particular character, Dr. Rick, aka Dr. Rick Stanton, who is played by Bradley Whitford. Honestly, I felt like this character should have had some different dialogue. I'm not blaming the actor, it's more the script. He makes some terrible jokes. He said, oh, it's Godzilla, why don't we go invite him over for a beer? Honestly, that type of sarcastic humor just ruins any fear or scale that you might have had with that entire scene, thus diminishing the entire effect of it in the first place. So then we cut to the next scene, which is them going on the USS Argo. First of all, the USS Argo doesn't make sense as a ship because it's based on a stealth bomber, yet you can detect it on any sort of radar, thus diminishing its purpose. So they infiltrate the Antarctic base, which is being headed by this terrorist organization, and they manage to infiltrate it, but then the enemies already know that they're there, and it's really confusing what happens. Apparently Sally Hawkins' character Dr. Graham dies in the scene. I don't even remember that happening. I've seen the movie 3 times and I still don't know where Dr. Graham's character died in. It's happened so fast that they don't even talk about or even mention. They just show that she died. I don't even remember her ever even being mentioned afterwards, her supposed death. So then we get this really tense scene, and honestly this scene frustrated me. We have one of the military soldiers who was about to kill Alan, but apparently this little pipe thing is blocking her from taking the shot of Alan. Why not just shoot him from an angle where it could hurt one of his limbs? You know, you could still get him there in the first place. So then we have Dr. Emma Russell. She's looking at Mark Russell. Mark Russell saying, Madison, let's go, because that's Millie Bobby Brown's character, Madison Russell. She's like, Madison, let's go. Let's get out of here. And then I just see Emma Russell in the background, out of focus depth of field shots, and she's like, Madison, it's time to go. I'm like, oh my goodness, they're not doing this in this movie. And then Emma Russell's like, run, and then she blows everything up, and King Ghidorah gets released, and pretty much she becomes an international terrorist because she's just unleashed a three-headed dragon upon the world. So King Ghidorah starts attacking military soldiers, everyone's scared, and then there's this VTOL ship that everyone's trying to get into to evacuate. King Ghidorah is taking its time with it. He's like hitting it gently enough to the point where the ship is still damaged enough where it can still fly. Then Godzilla appears, and the fight scene, it's pretty alright. They play the Godzilla theme over and over in this movie, but honestly my biggest problem is that you can hardly even see what's going on in the Antarctic scene. This is something that I've even talked about with other people. People say that Godzilla 2014 was hard to see, but keep in mind that when you're watching the scene, it may look cool on an IMAX screen or a 40x screen, but I bet that when you're watching this in normal format 3D or especially on home televisions, it's going to look absolutely atrocious when you watch it in terms of how much you can actually see in it. So then Godzilla, of course, he manages to hold off King Ghidorah, and then King Ghidorah decides to retreat, and that's where we get the USS Argo and the crew going to Mexico. But before that happens, we actually get Dr. Mark Russell getting hit by a jet that crashes out of the sky. He gets hit by the explosion, gets sent flying by about 30 feet, crashes onto the ground, and is still alive with absolutely no injuries, like as if nothing ever happened. So then we get to this other scene with Emma Russell's character that just frustrated me. She comes to the Monarch screens and starts talking about global warming and about how humans are destroying the environment and about how if we don't stop, humans are going to go extinct. Yet you do realize that if you have monsters, look, this is basic paleontology. You claim to be a paleontologist, yet you don't even understand the basic fundamentals of life. So do you know why the dinosaurs were the dominant species? Because they were much larger, they were dominant, and they were able to repopulate faster than mammals. The only reason why mammals became the dominant species in the first place was because the dinosaurs died out. The same thing is going to happen if you have the monsters. The monsters are going to overpopulate or spread, thus diminishing the type of human population demographics as well, because you're already going to have humans die from the monsters' rampages or destructional means. So if anything, you're just causing a reverse effect of what happened in the Paleozoic era, which is pretty pathetic in my opinion. So then we have Rodan, and he's in Mexico, and Emma Russell and Alan, they hack into the system and they free Rodan. And honestly, the shots with Rodan are pretty cool, but there's this one ugly shot where everyone's evacuating Mexico, and you see the people, and then it just zooms into Rodan, and it takes like 2 seconds for the camera to go into focus. It's an honestly amateurish shot. So then Rodan appears and he flies around. It's pretty cool. And then they detect that King Ghidorah comes in. But before King Ghidorah can actually emerge to that Pacific area, they make it like it's a twist. They show that King Ghidorah is disappeared in this tropical storm. And then guess what? This tropical storm, that's not a tropical storm, that's in fact King Ghidorah. It's like, what the heck was that? Was that supposed to be a huge twist? We already know this. If anyone who actually read up on the movie, you'll know that King Ghidorah can turn into a tropical storm. And even then, it was pretty obvious because you have the tropical storm in yellow. So any audience member could say, that's probably King Ghidorah, but the characters are like, wait, that's King Ghidorah. It's like we always have to be one step with the characters, so the characters be one step ahead of us. So then we get Rodan fighting King Ghidorah, and this is a pretty cool scene, honestly. But before that happens, we have Rodan flying into the Air Force. That's honestly one of my favorite shots. And you have this terrible female pilot. It's like, oh my god, we're dying! And she just crashes her plane to the ocean and she dies. And then Rodan and King Ghidorah fight for a while, but then King Ghidorah shoots Rodan in the sky and he hits the ground. So then you have O'Shea Jackson playing as Jackson Barnes, who's flying in his VTOL ship. Once again, he's always in a VTOL craft and he always manages to survive. He's basically the new black Aaron Taylor Johnson. And he manages to go into the USS Argo, but before that happens and anyone gets killed, Godzilla appears and fights off King Ghidorah. And as Godzilla and King Ghidorah are currently fighting, everyone's watching like, oh my goodness, this is so epic. And then out of nowhere, Admiral Stens comes onto the screen and says, hey everybody, we have an oxygen destroyer. Again, just like the Orca device, I don't know what this oxygen destroyer is. It comes out of nowhere. This is basically just fan service and implemented just to make people in the audience say, or say clap your hands because I know what this is, but yet there's no context or narrative or any real impact to how it had. The oxygen destroyer in the Virgil Godzilla movie was an allegory for the nuclear weapons and about how humans can advance and create more and more dangerous weapons, which will result in our entire extinction. In this movie, it's just used as a plot device to kill off Godzilla for some amount of time so that they don't kill off King Ghidorah too fast in the movie and we still have enough runtime. So Godzilla and King Ghidorah get hit by the Oxygen Destroyer. Godzilla is presumably dead, but he bites off King Ghidorah's head. King Ghidorah isn't dead by the Oxygen Destroyer. Everyone's like, how did King Ghidorah survive the Oxygen Destroyer? And they're like, oh wait, King Ghidorah, he's not in fact from Earth. He's an alien. He's a false king, as Serizawa says. Honestly, the line delivery and honestly the script itself is just so cringy, I don't even know what I'm watching. So King Ghidorah appears and he roars on the Rodan, and all the other monsters appear. And all these miscellaneous monsters that you have never even seen before, neither in Kong Skull Island, Godzilla 2014, or probably even the books unless you read some of them, appear. You have Behemoth, you have the giant spider thing, you have another female Muto, and you have this giant turtle in Germany, this little hill monster. I don't even know what's going on anymore. So then all these monsters start breaking out. It's like all hell breaks loose. And honestly, this is just really funny. Then it cuts to the scene of Mothra. She's in her cocoon. And I'm going to be honest, when Mothra was in her cocoon in China, I honestly got chills from that. It's like all these monsters start breaking out. You have Mothra coming out of her cocoon. You have the Mothra theme. I was like, oh my goodness, okay, I'm getting chills right now. This is actually a pretty great scene. But that scene only lasts for, I don't know, 40 seconds, and it doesn't even have Godzilla, Rodan, or King Ghidorah in it. And ironically, it's not even any fight taking place. It was just a spectacle in that scene. One thing that I found really interesting is that when Madison runs away from her mother after all the monsters get released, there's a nice little poster that says the enemy's listening, which is from World War II, which always fascinated me because, like, the enemy's listening, the enemies are listening to King Ghidorah. It's like World War II, King Ghidorah, that's a really nice allegory that I liked. So then we have Godzilla, and he's currently knocked out, and the military's like, okay, Mothra's calling out to Godzilla, let's send down a little submarine to go free him. They find out that the submarine the atomic missiles get jammed and they have to manually detonate. So Serizawa was like, okay, I can do this myself. So then Serizawa gets into another submarine, a smaller cockpit submarine. He goes down there, he blows himself up with Godzilla, and apparently it's supposed to be this really emotional thing, but I felt that Serizawa unnecessarily sacrificed himself because this all could have been avoided if it wasn't for Emma Russell trying to avenge her son. Like, look, I get this. Look, let me just explain why Emma Russell is the worst character in Godzilla history. So she says that I want to make sure Godzilla's death, not Godzilla, Andrew's death wasn't in vain, but keep in mind that if you're so hurt by the fact that you lost your son, just think about the millions of other mothers and fathers who are going to lose their daughters and sons because of you wanting to avenge your one child and release some three-headed dragon. It's like, it just wasn't even thought out. So then Godzilla gets awakened. It's like, yay, Godzilla's here. And then we have this whole subplot where Madison is still running away from her mother, and she goes down to Boston because that's where the terrorists are currently located, somewhere near Boston, and they play the signal. But in that time, King Ghidorah and Rodan are fighting against the entire U.S. Air Force and Navy at Washington, D.C. It's this whole apocalyptic scene where the entire military is just falling to these giant monsters. But as soon as Madison gets to the area, she starts playing the King Ghidorah sign, and King Ghidorah appears in like 2 minutes. He's just already there. He's like, hey, did you call me? I'm here now, guess what? So then King Ghidorah starts rampaging, and that's where everything just goes really bad. And everything just gets worse. And that's when suddenly Godzilla appears, and Godzilla's like, hey everybody, I'm here. But then Rodan's there, and then Mothra appears, and everyone's just fighting at Boston. We have the whole Air Force and the USS Argo attacking attacking King Ghidorah. They're all trying to converge on him. And then you have the mother. Honestly, the mother just frustrates me. The mother appears as a redemption arc where she's trying to save her daughter because her daughter is currently being attacked by King Ghidorah. Honestly, I don't know how these characters survive any of this. Like, there's a scene where Madison is running from King Ghidorah. She gets hit by King Ghidorah's gravity beams. But keep in mind that means she would have to run faster than, like, the speed of sound at least, because King Ghidorah's beams are traveling at light speed at most. That's really highball, but that means a human little girl is able to outrun these gravity light ray spectrum rays. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is really weird. Like, people talk about Aaron Taylor Johnson surviving this stuff. What about Madison? So then they try to rescue Madison. They're like, where is she? Oh, she's at home. And then they try to go there, and somehow she's hiding in a tub, despite the fact that everything else around her is destroyed. And then they try to drive away, and helicopters and jets are just dropping out of the sky everywhere they go. So Godzilla and King Ghidorah fight, and then Mothra fights Rodan. And there's this one part where Mothra manages to quote-unquote kill Rodan. Everyone's like, hey, yay, yay, Mothra killed Rodan. Godzilla's fighting King Ghidorah, and there's this really weird scene. Like, I was watching the movie with my friends, and we were just dying. There's a scene where King Ghidorah picks up Godzilla. They fly into space, and King Ghidorah just drops Godzilla. He's just like, ah! He's just falling out of the sky. I'm like, Jesus, what is going on right now? So then when Godzilla falls down, everyone's like, wait a minute, we gotta get his radiation levels up because he's already about to reach critical mass. Mothra appears, and she sacrifices her life and gives her essence to Godzilla so that he could turn into critical mass. Basically a ripoff of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. So then King Ghidorah gets distracted by the mother. she is somehow able to survive. You know, she gets her Jeep flipped over, then she comes out, King Ghidorah is about to kill her, and then Godzilla appears. Godzilla's in burning mode, aka fire mode, critical mass, whatever the heck you want to call this BS form, and Godzilla just wipes out King Ghidorah. He just wipes him out, and it's like King Ghidorah is dead. Somehow the mother probably did not survive that atomic explosion that happened in Boston. So then Godzilla appears on top of every single building in the city. He roars, the movie ends, and all the monsters surround him. Wow. What the heck, honestly? What the heck was that movie? I'm pretty sure I breezed off a lot of different points, but what the heck just happened? So yeah, that was just a basic quick summary of everything that I just really wanted to complain about. Of course, there's going to be a lot of different things that I'm going to go over. So first, let's start with Kyle Chandler as Dr. Mark Russell. So I think his character's okay. You know, there's something that some people have told me is that they like his character. Honestly, I find his character to be inoffensive. I just find him to be a little bit generic. If I were to equivocate him to any other character, I'd actually compare him to Nick Totopoulos. Maybe not in Godzilla 1998, but definitely in Godzilla the series. There's actually one scene where he says, "Nobody move," and I felt like Nick Totopoulos literally came out of the cartoon and said, "Godzilla! Back away!" Like, he's just like, oh my goodness, this is literally Godzilla the series. This character reminds me of. And another reason why is because Nick Totopoulos, in actually both incarnations, studied animals. And in this scene, Dr. Mark Russell actually studies animal herds. So there's one part where King Ghidorah releases all the monsters, and it's like, hey, I know there's all these animals, orcas to wolves, they hunt in packs. So I'm like, okay, this is literally Nico Totopoulos back, just played by a different actor. So I thought his character was pretty neat. I don't think he was a great character, but if I were to equivocate him to someone, it would probably be Nick Totopoulos in either 1998 Godzilla or especially in the animated series. And for those of you who have seen the animated series, hopefully you get what I'm talking about. Take cover! Nobody move! Okay, so Vera Farmiga plays as Dr. Emma Russell. I think the actress is fine. I think she definitely brings a lot of emotion. She's putting her all, but if I'm not angry at the actress, I'm just really frustrated with the script and the character. I'm not angry at the actress, but the script and the character, never has a character in recent times just angered me. She starts off with this character that you're meant to sympathize with. She lost her son, yet we don't have any understanding of why her son's even relevant. The only thing that we get from her son is that he was originally some guy that played at a Halloween costume with their father. That's it. There's no explanation into how either Mark Russell or Emma Russell are even this intelligent. You're just told that they work with orcas, but we're not shown them working with any sort of animals. We're just told this. There's something in storytelling called show, don't tell. The audience relies on visuals to understand concepts rather than exposition dialogue that forces them to have to remember things line by line. Because people are mostly visual learners rather than auditory, especially when you're watching a movie and not just listening to a podcast. So, the other thing is that Dr. Mark and Dr. Emma Russell's relationship really got bad after the 2014 incident. Mark Russell says, oh, I used to drink a lot and I used to be a bad person. Why doesn't the movie just show us a degradation of his character? For all I know, he still seems like the exact same character from 2014, because the only scene we get of him from the past is just him calling out for his son, and then now he's still caring about his family and trying to rescue his daughter. So if anything, we still see the same exact character, despite being told that he's a different person. So why not show us how he's changed and how he's come back full circle to want to care about his family? That was just something that I felt was missing for both characters. Going on to Millie Bobby Brown as Madison Russell, I know that Millie Bobby Brown was extremely popular in Stranger Things, but I have never watched Stranger Things. I know it's really popular with even some of my friends, but honestly, I felt that Millie Bobby Brown's talent was wasted here. All she was meant to do was just give exposition into what Monster's name was. She would go to China and say, Mothra! She would go to the Arctic, Monster Zero! It's just like, how do you know all the names of all these monsters? Okay, your mother told us, but this is just cringy with her naming off all the monsters like that. It's like a Dora episode or a kid's show, like, oh, look, what's that monster? Who's that Pokemon? It's Monster Zero! It's just really cringy exposition with her. Honestly, I didn't like her subplot where she was always crying and trying to run away. I just found her to be pretty annoying, almost as if she was in a completely different movie where she's trying to suffer from parental struggles. So, going on to the next character, this is going to be Bradley Whitford as Dr. Rick Santon. Honestly, I did not really like his character either. Some of his lines are just atrocious. You know, like when the Godzilla appears at Castle Bravo, there's a lot of tension. There's just silence. and ambience. And then you even get a jump scare that scares most of the audience when Godzilla swims towards the Castle Bravo, and he's just like, hey, you want to invite a Godzilla over for a beer? Are you out of your mind? It's honestly, it just doesn't fit with the scene. And then there was another line where they're looking at a quote-unquote Atlantis, and Dr. Mark Ross is like, oh my god, and then Whitford is just like, Zilla! Oh my god, Zilla. It was just the cringiest thing. People were laughing, but I just felt painful. It was like, oh my god, Zilla! Honestly, I felt that this character should have had less jokes. There's something in storytelling called narrative tension. How can you have tension if it's just ruined by jokes? The kind of thing I would equivocate it to would be in Star Wars The Last Jedi. So in Star Wars The Last Jedi, there's this tense scene with a large ship, similar to a large monster. It's a dreadnought, and it's basically attacking the rebel fleet. And Poe Dameron, who's this ace pilot, similar to Dark Russell, who's a very smart scientist, is taking out the Imperial ship. But then he comes into a transmission and says, who is this? And Hux is like, I don't know, who is this? He's like, this is General Hux of the First Order. He's like, he starts making jokes, and it just ruins the tension, the action that comes afterwards. That's the best way I could compare Dr. Rick Stanton to. Apparently, he's also based off of Rick from Rick and Morty. If you look at that show, that's more of a sci-fi comedy adult show. I don't really see how that kind of character would fit into a serious narrative of Godzilla, especially after the type of movie that Gareth Edwards tried to establish in 2014. So going on to the next character is going to be Sally Hawkins, aka Dr. Graham. It's great to see her return, but honestly, apparently she died in this movie. That's what people were telling me, but I didn't even see her die. Is it even in Antarctica? I don't even know where she dies. And even if she does die, there's no mention of her death. She just dies and that's it. When clearly she was a fundamental character that brought not only Serizawa, but Admiral Stenz and Ford Brody. I know that Dr. Graham doesn't get a lot of credit in Godzilla, but if you really look at her, she's definitely a character that works behind the scenes. In Godzilla 2014, she was working with Dr. Serizawa. She managed to gain the trust of Admiral Stenz and brought Ford Brody, who had recently lost his father Joe Brody to the Mutos. In fact, it is Sally Hawkins' character, Dr. Graham, who comforts Mark Russell when they're on the plane to the U.S., to Castle Bravo, after just talking about the loss of his family. So if anything, even though Dr. Graham isn't in a lot of scenes, in terms of the background narrative, she plays a huge part in bringing together events. So having her die is just completely ridiculous in my opinion. Next is going to be Charles Dance as Alan Jonah. Honestly, I think Charles Dance is considered by many to be pretty good at Game of Thrones. Of course, I never really watched Game of Thrones. Here he plays as Alan Jonah, a stereotypical British villain. Honestly, I thought having British people as a villain was a trope that we got rid of decades ago. This is something that you would see in James Bond movies, where you have a stereotypical British person who is the main antagonist of the movie. And honestly, I felt that this character was extremely underdeveloped. The only thing that I learned was again through freaking exposition. This movie just has nothing but exposition and rooms, just people talking in conferences. The only thing that people learn about Alan Jonah, if you could even remember this because it's so fast, is that he was a previous MI6 agent who turned into an eco-terrorist. But the whole point of his character is that he wants to try and restore natural order, but we're not given any reason why. Even though I'm angry at Emma Russell's development, I could say, okay, she wants to avenge her son, but what's Alan Jonah's motivation? What's driving him to want to try and root out humanity and restore these monsters? He just does it because, oh, I've seen human nature firsthand, and I've seen war after war. But that's the thing though, don't the monsters fight each other as well? You're trying to replace violence by solving it with violence. So if anything, Alan Jonah is a hypocrite in terms of his own philosophy, if he even had one. And honestly, I just don't see the purpose of the stereotypical British villain. I didn't even know he was going to be the human villain. I was thinking, okay, King Ghidorah's the villain, everyone's going to stop him. But then Alan Jonah appears, and I'm thinking, wait, we have a human villain now? Where did this guy come from? Next is going to be Thomas Middleditch as Dr. Sam. Honestly, Dr. Sam, he had some pretty awkward lines, especially at that cabin, in the cabin scene, which apparently was the same one from Endgame, which is pretty interesting, I guess. I thought that scene was just completely cringe. It was like, I'm a huge fan of your wife, and then people were like laughing. It's like, how wife's work. It's like, wow, that's supposed to be really funny, isn't it? But it really isn't. It's just honestly pointless. He wasn't really in the movie too much, which I guess I can't really rate him too much because he was just kind of in the background. Next character is going to be Aisha Hines as Colonel Diane Foster. She was just there one of the many female soldiers in this movie. Have you guys noticed that there were a lot of female soldiers? I mean, there were about 4 different female soldiers in the Monarch base. There were 5 of them in the terrorist organization, and there were 6 of them in the U.S. Air Force that were fighting Rodan. So I'm like, goodness, there are more female soldiers than male soldiers now. In Godzilla 2014, there was not one single female soldier except for probably one of them on the boats, I think. But other than that, it was mostly just males. This time around, there's a lot more females to even out the playing field. Honestly, I think Colonel Diane Foster, she's okay. There's not really much I can say about her. She's inoffensive, but she's not spectacular either. She's just kind of there. The next character is going to be O'Shea Jackson Jr., who plays as Jackson Barnes. So get this. Mr. Jackson plays as Jackson Barnes. So that's pretty interesting, I guess. But anyway, Jackson Barnes, he's basically Black Aaron Taylor Johnson. He survived some of the most ludicrous stuff I could even imagine. So you remember how in Godzilla 2014, people thought it was unrealistic that Ford Brody survived the attack from Muto at the bridge, the Muto's awakening, or 2014 San Francisco attack? This guy survives ridiculous stuff. So the first time we see him in action is when Godzilla emerges at Castle Bravo. He survives Godzilla attacking at Castle Bravo, of course, but he could have died because he was literally one of the men manning the turrets. If Godzilla had decided to attack the turrets, he would have died, but of course he didn't, so he was alive there. Second time we see him is in Antarctica. He somehow survives the ambush that's done by the eco-terrorists. Then once he makes it outside, all the military soldiers are attacking King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah vaporizes every single soldier with his gravity rays, yet somehow he's one of the only soldiers alive to make it to the VTOL. Then as he's trying to get the VTOL into the air, King Ghidorah starts ramming the VTOL, and then he manages to fly away. The next time we see, and the third time, is in Mexico, as one of the soldiers that is trying to evacuate the remaining refugees. However, Rodan flies over the entire city of Mexico, and he's hanging on to a pillar with some kids. And you think that, okay, Rodan's destroyed the entire city, maybe he died off screen because of just all the destruction and wind events. Nope, he's still alive and manages to get the VTOL, still alive enough to send a transmission that say, hey, we got passengers aboard, we got civilians, they'll help us on. Then, in the next time we see him, he's fighting in the Air Force against King Ghidorah Rodan with the Navy at Washington, D.C. Somehow, Rodan and King Ghidorah attack every single jet, and this guy's still alive in the USS Argo. This guy just survived some of the most crazy incident, yet all of his fellow comrades die in the field of combat, and he somehow survives with absolutely no injuries. And as a matter of fact, he even survives enough to stay in the final battle with Mark and Emma Russell. He even makes one pretty bad joke where he says, if I had you two as parents, I'd run away to home too. And then they're like, oh, that's where she is. So honestly, that was just pretty ridiculous. I'm surprised more people didn't find his character funny. The next character is, of course, David Strathairn as Admiral Stenz. So I really liked Admiral Stenz in Godzilla 2014. I thought Godzilla 2014 had Stenz as a very strict, straightforward, down-to-business, professional character. In fact, one of the many scenes that I wish they'd kept from 2014 was the speech that he gave to all of his soldiers about how many of the people in San Francisco have family and loved ones. I thought that scene before the Halo jump would have made it so much more impactful because it would have been the first time that we would have seen a personal and intimate moment with Admiral Stenz. However, of course, that scene did not make it to the final product. So when I saw Admiral Stenz in the new movie, Godzilla King of the Monsters, I thought, okay, maybe they're going to allow him to have more screen time and really shine as a character. But in this movie, all he does is to just serve as someone that looks disappointed in a courtroom, and then come back 40 minutes later in the movie to say, hey everybody, we have an oxygen destroyer. So again, I'm not blaming the actor, or even really the character, but more of the script. I think the character is fine, but it's more of the script that says, hey, we got an oxygen destroyer, may God have mercy on all of you, we gotta get out of there in 2 minutes. First of all, the oxygen destroyer is just shoehorned in for fan service. It honestly made no sense. Where did the oxygen destroyer come from? Now look, you could say, okay, the oxygen destroyer is there. Look, I'll give Legendary the benefit of the doubt. What they should have done with the oxygen destroyer is maybe hint at it a little bit on their website or in the book. And if they did, then that's fine for some people like me. But if not, that's going to hurt the average movie-going audience. They're like, what is this oxygen destroyer? How does it work? Where did it come from? I don't even know what this is even from. So now we're going on to the next two characters. This is going to be Ken Watanabe. He plays as Dr. Serizawa. Dr. Serizawa he was good in this movie. But again, it's this script right here that just ruined his character for one scene. There's this one scene where Dr. Serizawa pulls out the watch. The old watch that he had from Hiroshima and Nagasaki World War II. And in 2014, this was played off as a very serious and emotional moment. Because he's saying, my people have already experienced the atomic bomb. Now America might have to experience the same thing with Godzilla and Muto. It was a very heart-driven scene. In this movie, the watch is played out for a quick time joke. When he shows it to Mark Russell, he says, oh, look at my watch. And Mark Russell's like, what time is it? And he's like, time to get that new watch. And people are laughing, and I'm thinking, what? You just ruined this. The most I could equivocate this to was when Rey handed Luke Skywalker the lightsaber, and he just tosses it over his shoulder. There was so much narrative, so much emotional resonance with this watch, and they just played off in this movie for a simple joke, saying, it's time to get that new watch. That line was so cringy, it gave me a flashback to one of my friends in real life. Whenever someone would ask one of this guy, what time is it? He's like, time to get a watch. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, they're not going this route for this movie. But honestly, I thought his sacrifice at the end was pretty noble. But at the same time, I just felt that everything else leading up to it could have been prevented when you really think about it. Okay, next character, and probably the final two, is Zhang Ziyi as Dr. Eileen Chen and Dr. Ling Chen. So the whole point of this character is to basically show that they're twins, yet neither of them are in the same place because they're played by the same actress. So I thought this character was okay. I just thought there was nothing really much going for her, aside the fact that she was, again, just fan service to show that the twins existed. But real quick, just about the actress herself, Zhang Ziyi, if I'm even pronouncing this right, I was originally taking a film class, and there was one movie we had to watch which was called House of Flying Daggers, which is basically an old Chinese, well, not old, it's actually pretty new, from early 2000s. It's a Chinese martial arts film, and when I looked it up, I was thinking, oh my goodness, that's the actress from House of Flying Daggers, because I literally just watched that movie a few months earlier and had to write a paper on it, so seeing her in Godzilla was a pretty nice way to come back full circle, just in terms of my nostalgic purposes. But as a character, I just thought she was okay. You know, she definitely provided exposition into what King Ghidorah was about being this dragon in Eastern culture. But one of my favorite scenes with her is when she's with the other scientists in China and Mothra just emerges out of the waterfall. That scene is just breathtaking and beautiful. So overall, those were my thoughts on the characters. Now we could go on to the monsters. Now going on to the monsters, I personally think that they're pretty fine, but this movie with the action really reminded me of, Batman v Superman and Justice League. So, have you guys ever watched Man of Steel and Batman v Superman? Regardless of whether or not you like those movies, or the characters and how they're portrayed in them, each character, Superman and Batman in both of those movies, have their own established theme. Superman has his own theme that appears in Man of Steel, and Batman has his theme in Batman v Superman. Both are composed by Hans Zimmer and are associated with those incarnations and interpretations of the character. Come around to Justice League, all of a sudden, the music for these two characters are not the original themes that were composed for them, but instead older, decades-old incarnation themes. So when Superman appears, it's not the Hans Zimmer score that so many grew to love in 2013, it's instead the John Williams 1978 theme. Instead of the 2016 Batman theme from Batman v Superman that was dark and grim and portrayed this older Bruce Wayne, we instead get the Danny Elfman Batman theme that is associated with the 1989 Batman movie. So for an audience member watching it, it may seem cool to hear the original Superman theme in a new movie, or the original Batman theme in a new movie, but the more you think about it, the more it just kind of doesn't make sense, because it doesn't go with that interpretation or that version of the character. It would be as if you had Godzilla 2000 and all of a sudden you play the soundtrack from Son of Godzilla. It may seem nostalgic, but it would just come out of nowhere. Same thing for this movie. In fact, this movie takes it a step further and reuses sound effects. For example, whenever Godzilla appears, the Bear McQuarrie theme starts playing, and it's the original Godzilla theme. And even when Godzilla roars, it's the Showa roar instead of usually the 2014 roar, which I just always found to be kind of weird. Because even though it's cool to hear the Godzilla theme in another movie, and it's pretty interesting to see Godzilla with his original roars, it doesn't make sense because this wasn't already pre-established in 2014, therefore it doesn't fit with this interpretation of the character because he already had his own theme. In fact, while watching this movie, Godzilla King of the Monsters, I was actually waiting for the Alexandria Desplat Godzilla theme to play. A lot of people may say it's not as good as the original Godzilla theme. And I agree, it's not as good as the original theme, but that's the 2014 theme. That's the legendary Godzilla theme. That's the music that goes with that interpretation and version of that character. So when you play the Showa Japanese or the Heisei theme, it just doesn't make Godzilla seem like its own version anymore, but instead a rehash of older incarnations. Same thing with the roars. In fact, this was something that I didn't even really notice with other monsters, with the exception of Mothra. King Ghidorah had its own original roars, its own original behavior, in the sense that the middle head always bullied on the left head for some reason, and even had its own new abilities such as regeneration, shooting lasers out of its wings like a Shin Godzilla ripoff, and even featuring the ability to turn itself into a massive tropical storm. That's no moon, that's a Death Star, that's no storm, that's Monster Zero. Something else that I just found really weird about King Ghidorah as a character was the inconsistency of its name. They called King Ghidorah for the first half of the movie Monster Zero, which personally, I think that actually made King Ghidorah seem cooler. You have this giant menacing threat. Instead of giving it some actual name, you just call it Monster Zero because it's such a behemoth. Not the actual monster behemoth, of course. And then they just switch it to Ghidorah, or Ghidorah, whichever one you want to pronounce it as. And it's like, okay, now we're back to square one about calling it King Ghidorah. Because no other movie since Invasion of the Astro Monster had called King Ghidorah Monster Zero. So that name had kind of been lost through time. And hearing Monster Zero be identified as that within a military term was just very refreshing until they just went back to generic King Ghidorah. So now when we look at everything in terms of Mothra, Mothra honestly had one of the best scenes in the movie. One of my favorite scenes again is where Mothra just emerges out of the waterfall, and everything is just going so perfectly. And the reason why I found that scene to just be so mesmerizing was because for once, the music, especially the reused music, was not forced and crammed in. It came in subtly, and then you have just everyone looking in awe, and Mothra just emerges out of the waterfall as this beautiful, majestic creature. And just overall, some of the things with Mothra are pretty neat. But I have a major complaint with Mothra. Whenever Mothra fights, it's just pretty pathetic. I thought that, okay, Legendary has Mothra in their hands. There are going to be some crazy things they're doing with Mothra. And then they just make a rehash of what Toho already did with their Mothra. Mothra comes in to save Godzilla and attacks King Ghidorah, but Rodan just effortlessly abuses Mothra in the entire fight. The only time Mothra has a time to actually shine is when she stabs Rodan, and in that part everyone cheered and clapped. But guess what? Rodan didn't die. Mothra tries to take on King Ghidorah, and King Ghidorah just says, okay, you're done, Mothra. And King Ghidorah just explodes and disintegrates into the air, causing Godzilla to turn into critical mode, which was pretty tragic, but at the same time, Mothra was just so effortlessly killed by King Ghidorah. And honestly, that was pretty sad. But let's just do a quick rehash. So, Godzilla. The theme just feels really forced whenever they play it, even some of the sound effects. I felt that they should have done it once. The time that I felt they should have done that was with the final battle. If Godzilla had appeared and they had played the Bear McQuarrie Godzilla theme just once, it would have been a complete uproar of just excitement. Because you hear some of the original 2014 music, or you hear just some new tracks from Bear McQuarrie, and then you hear that original theme come on, and you're thinking, yes, there we go, now we're in. But because they used it so much, it just became so tiring to hear, burn, dun, 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 Gojira. And also, there was like a pretty funny choir all the time. It was like Mothra and King Ghidorah and Godzilla with their little choir in the background and chanting their monster's name. I was like, okay, that's a new one. That's a new one. But either way, just minimally use the Godzilla theme. There's this term that I think most people have heard of. Actually, I have two of them. Quality over quantity. The quality of the scene that they should have used the theme in matter more than the quantity they used the theme in. And sometimes more is less. Say, for example, you give someone sugar, a sugary or salty snack. If you have that person eat it over and over, they're eventually going to either get tired of it or lack the ability to see what's special in it. But if you give them that desirable object of a snack every now and then, it gives payoff and satisfaction to it. Same thing can be applied to this movie with how many times they use the Godzilla theme. As Godzilla as a character, he was okay. Nothing much really to him. I thought that critical mode part, or Fire Godzilla, was just honestly ripped straight out of Godzilla Unleashed. There's even one line where Dr. Rick Sanford, I believe was his name, Dr. Rick, says his radiation is approaching critical mass. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is literally Godzilla Unleashed coming out right before me. In fact, is it me? Or did a lot of locations, because there was so much CGI in each location, the Antarctic scene was basically Sydney, Australia. Mexico was basically Seattle. China and everything was basically Monster Island from the game with the little waterfall. And then Boston, Seattle were basically Tokyo, London, and just those kind of cities. It just felt like this movie was treading over Godzilla Unleashed. In fact, the way how the monsters all get from one place to another so conveniently also felt like Godzilla Unleashed. One moment they were in Antarctica, the next they were in Mexico, the next they were in Washington DC, then Seattle. It just felt like Godzilla Unleashed, where you choose which part of the map you want to go to, and you just go from place to place in about 1 second. But anyway, for Godzilla as a character, again, I just thought he was okay. I thought the fire mode was just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, just think about it, guys. Just think about it real quick. Hear me out, like you have for the rest of this video. The stakes in this movie were so high. The destruction was so grandiose. There were so many monsters. It took Godzilla to achieve a brand new form, to die one time, only to come back. Mothra's help, Rodan in the way, to stop King Ghidorah. How is Kong gonna compare to that? Just think about it. It's like if you make a superhero movie and you put a character like, I don't know, Thanos in the second movie, and then you have the next villain be someone like Ultron. Just the power, the scale, and the magnitude of everything just doesn't compare. And honestly, this movie felt really rushed. I felt that King Ghidorah should have been in the third movie or the fourth movie. It's just they introduced him way too quickly, and they're probably going to keep him alive because of the end credits scene. But honestly, what's the point? Because King Ghidorah has already had his grandiose moment. Whatever you do with King Ghidorah after that isn't going to be as titanic as this one. I just don't understand, honestly. It just baffles my mind, the decision making for this franchise as it's going by so far. I mean, Godzilla has the fire mode. He could just nuclear pulse and disintegrate everything in his path. What the heck is King Kong gonna do to that? As much as I want to see King Kong potentially have a chance, I have to look at the facts and say, okay, you've staked everything too high, you've risen Godzilla's power too much. King Kong and Godzilla fighting isn't gonna top the entire world being surrounded by giant monsters on every part of the globe. It's just not gonna be able to do that. There's not even much build up to King Kong either. All I do with King Kong is just feature him in stock footage or in a news article. But there's no build up to say, okay, we're going to have the fight of the century here. Because the fight of the century already happened with King Ghidorah. They even talk about it on the news report in Boston where they say, many people are calling this the time or the rise of the Titans. Because this is literally the end of days for humanity. everything is going wrong. So how is humanity going to recover from this and then still have King Kong and other future movies like Destroy All Monsters? When this was already basically a Destroy All Monsters in of itself. It just doesn't. I just personally think that if the Legendary Verse wants to even compete with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or whatever Stephen King is trying to do with his horror movies, or even the DCEU, they should have just gone a little bit slow. Godzilla 2014 was a very grounded movie. It established certain concepts. But this movie comes out of nowhere and just rushes everything. Aliens are a thing. Critical mass is a thing. Regeneration is now a concept for monsters. There are so many different monsters just in hibernation. We don't even know how Monarch even got these monsters. They just found them and say, hey, we found a monster, just construct a little facility around it. We don't even know just anything about these different monsters. We're supposed to feel terrified and absolutely threatened by them. It just makes absolutely no sense. It's just too much, too fast, with nothing but exposition, and the movie's only a certain amount of time, so they don't have exposition to even explain everything, even if they wanted to. So, Godzilla, I think he's an alright character. Nothing too much to say about him. I think the fire mode was just completely ridiculous. Could have been done without. Instead, they should have just allowed Godzilla to just use his nuclear pulse and say, oh wow, he can use a new ability. But don't introduce a brand new form. It was just ridiculous. And then there's no repercussions to it. Obviously, this form was based off of Burning Godzilla. But again, similar to the Oxygen Destroyer, there's no narrative context, there's no stakes. Burning Godzilla is meant to symbolize Godzilla's death. He was meant to symbolize how Godzilla had accumulated so much radiation to the point where his body had to melt down like a nuclear reactor, such as the one in Chernobyl and Fukushima, Japan. But instead here, it's just a brand new power-up that Godzilla can all of a sudden just pull out of nowhere and easily just kill King Ghidorah like nothing with it and disintegrate everything that's a part of him. Man. So I thought Godzilla was okay. Overused his theme. Fire form was completely unnecessary and stupid. But otherwise, it was okay. Mothra. Mothra was weak. I remember that scene where she's on the building after she gets Rodan. She's having a hard time just crawling and keeping herself up. She's frail, she's weak, but she had one good scene, and that was at the waterfall. Rodan had a couple ugly shots in the movie, but he did have some nice shots, like the one where he's flying in the distance with the jets. I thought Rodan's theme was pretty ridiculous. It felt like something out of a Jumanji or Rampage, where every time Rodan appears, woo, woo, I'm like, what the heck is that? Like, that music just seems so out of place. It's like it's out of a different movie. It's like you took a bunch of horns and just crammed into this movie. It felt like I was watching Rampage when the wolf comes out of nowhere, and it's like, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's like, oh, of course the wolf can fly, and then the wolf flies right out of the building. It's like, woo, woo. Or, for example, in Kong Skull Island. Actually, no, Kong Skull Island didn't even have that. It was mostly, that sounded like music that you would hear in a rock movie. It just felt out of place. It felt really cheesy. I didn't like Rodan's theme that much. I just thought it was pretty unnecessary, you know? As a character, Rodan's okay. I didn't actually expect Rodan to side with King Ghidorah. That was kind of interesting. But I wish I wish Godzilla and Rodan got to fight each other one more time. Well, instead it was Rodan versus Mothra. And Rodan was just abusing Mothra in that fight. I just thought Rodan was okay. Now on to the villain himself, King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah was pretty interesting. Apparently King Ghidorah is an alien, so okay, that's cool. I give Legendary Verse props for that. They introduce alien monsters, which means that they have a whole nother avenue that they can go into. But as a character, Ghidorah is just kind of a bland, generic monster, just like the male Muto. They made a huge deal about how they had 3 people play as each heads, and how they had their own personalities. But as far as I knew, King Ghidorah was just one creature. Absolutely no difference. In terms of his fights, I thought he was just a little bit overpowered, but especially for a second movie villain. It's that overpowered. It's like in Batman v Superman when they introduced Doomsday. This is literally like Batman v Superman. You have this character, Doomsday, who is extremely powerful, and they put him in the second movie. In fact, this whole movie is kind of like Batman v Superman. Just think about it. Hear me out here. So, Godzilla gets hit by a missile and is knocked out. But when he's revived, he has to defeat the villain. Superman's fighting Doomsday, and he gets knocked out by an atomic missile and is knocked out. But once he revives, he has to stop Doomsday. This movie literally felt like a DCEU movie. The visuals with all the weird dark blues and the CGI literally felt like DC made this movie. Which is not necessarily a good thing when your movie feels like Batman v Superman and Justice League, just with giant monsters instead of CGI lips. So, yeah, there was King Ghidorah. I thought he was okay, but I felt he could have been much better in terms of his power scaling, attributes, and overall just everything to him. I thought the monsters could have been better, or if anything, they weren't even necessary for the second movie only. Going on to the background monsters. Look, the background monsters, they were needless. I mean, they were pointless. I knew nothing about them. They just come out of nowhere. The audience is expected to know why these guys are a threat, but there's no reason why. They just appear, cause a little bit of destruction. King Ghidorah calls them over to Boston, and because each and every single one of them are so slow, they can't even make it there in time. And by the time they get there, Godzilla has already killed King Ghidorah. Like, the monster's like, okay, King Ghidorah, we're here to help you. Behemoth is like, oh, we're here to help you, King Ghidorah. Munto's like, we're here to get Godzilla. And then Godzilla's like, hey, fellas, I just killed King Ghidorah. Now what? And then everyone's like, oh, crap, we better all bow down to Godzilla or he's going to blow us up. But honestly, they were just kind of stupid and pointless. I felt that was completely unnecessary. If Godzilla already rules the monsters, how is Kong going to challenge him? Isn't that going to be a repeat of what this movie did? Just with a giant gorilla instead? Okay, those were my thoughts on the monsters. Just frustrated. This movie just frustrates me to no end. But look, I've been talking about the movie and bashing it a lot. So let's just go over some things I like. First thing I liked is that Mothra had a good scene. I know I keep saying that one scene. There's gotta be more than that, right? There were some cool monster shots, like Rodan flying with the jets in the background, and Godzilla. You see, that's the thing, though. There's just so much that I don't like about the movie, and it's hard to pinpoint things that I actually do like because I'm just so conjured up by negativity. Just get that I do like some of the monster action shots. It just felt like this whole movie was fan service. Now, I like to mention someone that I talked to in real life. They said that this movie isn't actually a movie, but instead it's just a homage and a collage of everything that fans want. And that's exactly what this movie is. This movie is basically just fan service. The movie has Godzilla themes Godzilla fans like. It has sound effects Godzilla fans like. It has character tropes that Godzilla fans like a message about some human terrorist guy. Something that we had seen in Godzilla vs. Biollante and some other movies that I just can't, or Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. And then we have Fire Mode, Fire Godzilla, which is basically just Critical Mass Godzilla. I can't really compare this Godzilla movie to any of the other ones because this movie is just so nonsensical and pretty bad in my opinion. And that's why, as we're speaking right now, it's starting to underperform. Now, do you know why I actually attribute this movie to not being that good? I attribute this movie to not being that good for something that I would like to call the Hollywood China syndrome. Now, if you're not aware of this, Hollywood movies in recent years are not meant to appeal to Americans anymore. They're actually meant to appeal to Chinese people. And the reason why is because the Hollywood industry has begun to realize that China is starting to open itself and start limiting its censorship policies. You know? Ever since the communist leadership in China, the CCP, has started to lengthen its control over things in the media, American influence has started to swell into China. And of course, China is a brand new market, not only for the tech industry, but also for the film industry. That's why when McDonald's opened in China, the sign changed from millions served to billions served, because literally there are billions of people in China now. So America sees that, oh, China has more people than America, let's try to market to China. That's why Transformers is so successful. Even though the Transformer movies are nothing but action and are pretty much terrible movies regarded by most critics, they appeal so much and aim so much money because they manage to win over the Chinese audiences. That's why in one of the Transformers movies, it literally takes place in China. And that's why for this movie, they probably got Zhang Ziyi to play as Dr. Eileen Chen and Dr. Ling Chen because she's a very famous actress in China who was known for House of Flying Daggers, which is one of China's most critically acclaimed movies. So the whole point of this movie is to be bad on purpose, so that it's nothing but just action and explosions and CGI, because Chinese markets will eat that stuff up. That's why the Star Wars movies, despite having a lot of action themselves, the Star Wars movies focus more on political messages and themes and ties to feminism or left-wing politics and drama. That's why Star Wars isn't necessarily winning in China, but Transformers is. And that's because Chinese audiences typically like more action because, not really to be offensive here, but they don't really care about American concepts and values because they just want to see a Hollywood action blockbuster. So that's generally why this movie can be seen as bad, is because it's intentionally bad. Because it's meant to gain in more Chinese audiences. However, as we're seeing right now domestically, this movie is starting to really underperform. And honestly, folks, just my opinion, if this movie continues to fail, let this serve as a reminder to future audiences and moviegoers that a Godzilla movie shouldn't just be something to appeal to fans. Because even though this Godzilla movie can appeal to a couple dozen fans, that doesn't mean it's going to have a positive effect on the general population. There's a lot of references. This movie's made for a Godzilla fan, but in my opinion, even as a Godzilla fan, I did not find myself that satisfied with this movie. I rate this movie a 5 out of 10. There are just so many things that I find wrong with it, but it's not the pinnacle of bad movie making. It's definitely not the worst Godzilla movie by a far landslide. There are plenty of other movies that I enjoy less than this one. But there are just some things that I just found myself really frustrated in terms of decision making, script making, and everything else that just made me question this movie. Anyway, I know that there are probably the hundreds of people that are going to watch this video and say, I love this movie, this is the best Godzilla movie ever. And if you enjoy this movie, great. More power to you. I'm not trying to diminish whether or not you like this movie. If this video changed your view on this movie, then I think that's good, that you're starting to see my perspective, but that's not really my intention either. I just want you to hear from a different perspective, because honestly, most of the videos that you probably see are going to be about positive things about the movie, so I just want to make sure that there's something that's non-biased here. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.